Hello, today I am going to be showing you how I would read and interpret the short story excerpt from this book called In Wyoming by Mark Spragg. So as I go along, you'll notice that I've made some annotations inside. You should be, as you're watching this, having this pulled up beside you and also making some comments on the side. That's close reading skills that we looked at in the last video. So starting out, the first thing that I'm thinking of is in Wyoming, and I think, okay, if we think about some of the skills you're supposed to be connecting, thoughts that you have to other experiences that you've maybe had, and I'm like, well, okay, I've been to Wyoming. I went to Yellowstone this past summer, and even though I saw only a small bit of the state, it's still something that is worth making note of because I do have that recognition. Maybe you've never been to Wyoming, but maybe you've seen it in TV shows, or maybe you actually have gone. So if you have, this might be something that's really easy to comment, either being like, yeah, I've been there, or no, I haven't. So now we get to the actual work itself. I'm going to go through and read paragraph by paragraph and then explain out kind of the thoughts that I'm having as I'm going through this and how the way that Mark writes this relates to the feel or what he's trying to convey about Wyoming itself. So, it starts with this. The place is violent and it is raw. Wyoming's not a land that lends itself to nakedness or leniency. There is an edge here. Living is accomplished on that edge. Most birds migrate. Hibernation is viewed as necessary, not stolen. The crippled, the old, the inattentive perish. And there is the wind. So right off, firstly, the first thing that we learn about this place, it's violent and it is raw. Those are two very violent words. If he had said like, oh, or if he had just started and said Wyoming is not a land that lends itself to nakedness, that might be a slightly different feeling. The first feelings we get at all is violent and raw. It's very visceral words. You probably have an idea in your head when he says that. So now we have this idea of nakedness, and this lets us know pretty early on that Wyoming is about survivalism. It's not about being soft-bellied, wearing no clothes, like lounging out in the sun. Like, it's a place where you have to be clothed, not literally, but figuratively. Well, also probably literally, but it's mostly trying to get that sense that this is a place where you are a survivor, not just someone casually living there. Then I have this idea of hibernation. Hibernation is viewed as necessary, not stolen, so not something that you could choose to do just because you want to feel like it. The important thing to recognize here is that he is not talking about bears, he is talking about humans. Like, hibernation and basically becoming inactive in the winter is something that you have to do to survive, otherwise you would not. And then this last sentence, and there's the wind. That is this opening introduction, if you will. The last thought we get is there is the wind. The way he says it, there's this sense of there's this feeling with it, this like almost that it's it's going to come up again. We also know, because it's called from winds, that wind is probably going to be pretty important, but the way that he phrases it, it feels like there's something left unsaid, something more that we need to know. The winds blow through most every day, unchoreographed with spontaneous and elegance of a brawl. There are tracks where the currents draw so relentlessly that the trees that surround a home or line an irrigation ditch all lean east, grown permanently east, as though mere columns of submissive fillings bow towards some fickle pole. Little is decorative. There are a few orchards. Fruit enters by interstate, truck-ripened, not tree-ripened. Wyoming boasts coal, oil, gas, uranium, widely scattered herds of sheep and cattle, and once 7 million bison. The winds have worked the bison skeletons pink, white, and finally to dust. The carboniferous forests rose up and fell and molded under the winds, layer upon layer, finally pressed into coal. The winds predate the coal. The winds wail a hymn of transience. So once again, right away, we have this very violent word. It's associated with the wind and therefore with Wyoming, since we already have previously established that wind equals Wyoming, and wind also equals violence, which is, once again, he's just repeating the same sentiments over and over, trying to get this feeling across to us. In the same way, we have little is decorative. This is not a place for thriving. This is not, California or, Florida where, they plant trees because they look pretty and because they think it's going to be cool. No, they plant trees because they feel like they have to. So this is a list here. It lists all the things that Wyoming boasts. Maybe you're thinking that Wisconsin has a couple of these in common, which is probably true, but this is going to be the first example of a list that we're going to get. It's giving you a lot of information all at once. But the more important thing just to recognize is that it is a list. So then lastly in this sentence, we have this idea that the winds are immortal, that they was there at the beginning and that they will be here at the end. We can kind of see, in comparison, that things like forests or the bison, the more nature things, the things that we would also as humans recognize, eventually get turned to dust or go away, but the winds are always there, and it's the winds that cause this change. So as we've recognized at this point, we've been compared to animals. We are in this group of the bison and the forest. The winds are eventually going to get to humans too, and the winds are going to be what remains. On the windward side of homes, trees are planted in a descending weave of cottonwood, spruce, russet oil, finished with something thorny, stiff, and fast-growing. A hem of carrigan, a windbreak, utilitarian first, ornamental by accident. Shade is a random luxury. There is at least always a breeze. Like death and taxes, it can be counted on. Almost 100,000 square miles and 500,000 residents, there aren't that many homes. Towns grip the banks of watercourses tenaciously, ghost towns finally tumbling to the east, gone the way of the buffaloes, to dust. So once again, right here, we have another list, and it's giving that same idea that we've already had, that it's always for a purpose, utilitarian, ornamental, or pretty just by accident. And then once again, there's always a breeze. The one thing you can always count on is that there's going to be wind. It talks about how there's not that many houses. I do remember while driving through Wyoming on a road trip, it was pretty hard, to find a gas station. If you saw a gas station, you stopped. And it talks about that same idea, which I kind of said we can glean from the sentence here, but it says it pretty definitively here. Ghost towns turning to east, gone the way of the buffaloes to dust. The wind takes down the towns eventually. For as few people that live there, eventually they succumb and they cannot stay. They are not forever, not like the wind. There are precious few songbirds. Raptors ride the updrafts. The hares, voles, mice, skunks, squirrels, rats, shrews, and rabbits exit squinting into the sun and wind. Their eyes water, their hearts spike in terror when swept by the inevitable shadow of a predator. The meadowlark is the state's bird, but I think of them as hors d'oeuvres, their song a dinner bell. Eagle, falcon, hawk, and owl live here year-round, the true residents, the natives, the gourmands. Their land-bound relatives work the middle ground. Lynx, lion, fox circle the table. Coyotes make their living where they can, as gypsies do. So in this one, we just get a lot of lists, and some part of it could be just, that this dude is trying to explain what the wildlife in Wyoming is, but he's also putting them in a pecking order. So we have the hares, voles, mice, squirrels, rats. Most of the things that live there are just mere food. Even the meadowlark, which is the state's bird, he thinks of as a tasty little morsel in the beginning, and the eagle, falcon, and hawk owl are the true residents because they are the ones that can ride the winds. They are the ones that the wind works in their favor. They are the ones, they're your mods, where they can truly thrive off this and not merely survive. The lynx, lion, and the fox are there too, circling, but they're not quite as low down as these guys, but they're not quite as up high as these dudes. Much of the landscape is classified as subarctic steppe. In Laramie, a winter's evening entertainment consists of watching the gauges on the local weather channel. 30 below zero, 60-mile-an-hour winds are standard fare. From early fall to late spring, Wyoming's odor is that of wetted skies. The dome of a perfect bell settles, blue, uninterrupted, moistureless. It is nothing in Wyoming to look 20 miles in every direction, the horizon scribbled in sharp contrast peripherals. No wind, we shout in wonder. We speak too loudly. We are accustomed to screaming over the yowl of air. We are quiet to whisper. No wind, we whisper. We smile and slump. Think to the sloth that survives effect. For the end of a crisis, this is our posture. So this is another example where I was reading through and I'm like, well, that sounds like Wisconsin. Where I grew up in Green Bay, it would pretty consistently get to these temperatures and this wind. I definitely remember my senior year, we were off for a week, not because it was snowing too much, but just it was too cold. It was more than 30 below, and that was just our life for that week. And when it got to 30 below, we're like, oh, thank God it's warm again. So, as you're reading this, you might be having connections to your own life, or maybe you have been to a place, or maybe you are totally unused to this, and you're like, that sounds awful. So the next thing to notice is this is the first time quotes are used. Even though this is about the humans and the humans that live there, it's not really focused on the humans in their everyday life. It's not focused on that sound. The sound that we hear is the wind. This is the time. It's a very sharp moment where there is no wind, and so their voices rise above it, but they are not used to it, and it goes back to a whisper. So I'm going to pause this video here. There will be a part 2 so I don't run over time to read these last 2 sections and explain out some of the themes and takeaways about how Spragg writes this. I will see you in the next video.